So these big increases, can you refresh my memory? You've got 24% in engineering, and 18% in rec, and 22% in parks. What's triggering those
Can you
increases?
show me which?
Sure, sorry,
Page 153.
E3 on 153.
And you're showing 22%, where are you seeing that?
24%.
24%, oh, okay.
And then on E7, 18%.
So those percentages are comparing 2011 actual to 2012 budget. When we built our budgets, we mostly said, what did we plan to do last year? And then what do we plan to do this year? And in an area like recreation, where we had an unexpected staff member not able to be at work, and therefore we didn't spend as much as we expected to spend. So we still expect to do that project or that work this year. It's not a project, it's ongoing work, but we had a staff member not in that position during the year in 2011 for part of the year. Therefore we didn't spend it. But now we're staffed up again and we will be planning to
So the
spend
more
it.
realistic numbers in the next column over.
Is to compare the 2011 budget against the 2012 budget,
So it's
unless we know a story.
Okay.
So is the savings there, are they included in the 166 that we?
Yes, part of that 166 arose because we had a couple of situations, but a staff member not able to be in their role for part of the year.
So, in order to speed this up, is there any way we can just start eliminating the things that we agreed to eliminate? That were, I mean, so they're all, sorry, they're all on,
Unless we decide to add or change.
Exactly, if you want to look for more savings, right now we're sitting at 2.9% tax rise, not counting the solid waste parcel tax increase.
Which is 0.5%.
Yeah, it's-
$16,000 roughly, so.
Yeah,
I
that's true.
think one of the main questions for council is the Tunstall Bay boat launch, whether or not they wish to proceed with that. And we do have Will here,
Resolution to put that on hold.
pending further information from.
Yeah.
Now we have the
We were gonna get staff
But
input,
we've got a report,
and it's there.
so, council has yet to take that private.
Oh, Councillor Stone, you were probably out of the room when I said, I went through a list of things that I kind of went against council's direction for various reasons, and I explained why those reasons were. And Tunstall Bay is one of those that I felt that we didn't have accurate information when we made that decision, so I put it in pending our hearing of Bill's report, but I can take it out again if council redirects. The other thing was the salt briner, and that was my mistake. I didn't have clarity in my mind that we were removing that. Cost of living allowance is one thing that I have included that I wasn't sure if I should or not, but as that's our policy, that's what I've got included in there.
The Tunstall Bay boat rent doesn't make any change to the 2.8%. It's not a tax increase.
That's
it's only
correct.
strategic reserves. And,
It depletes our reserves, and one of those reserves was earmarked for the community center project. And that has put a bit of a wrench in their plans, and they've rejigged and found a way around that. But that is something that I brought up to council last time. So
Will?
did you want to hear from Will? Oh, sorry. Look at that. Boy, she can sure take over here.
Talking about boat ramp, but pass those around, just a little diagram of the site.
Sorry, bud. Thanks.
Kathy, slight diversion of topic, but where do you buy those binders? Those really big ones?
Brandon Toy, I'm sure.
Okay. Just wanted to know. seats. Okay, so the figure I just presented there is just a site photo with just a few illustrations of the boat ramp and the Tunstall Bay area in general. So the main thrust of this report is to update council on the current status of the Tunstall Bay boat ramp plan, to clarify the reasons for the 2012 timeline, and to present a detailed financial breakdown of the life of the facility, including the replacement costs. So
Will, can we just cut through the stuff and just go directly to the cost and the reasons for completing it for this year?
sure. So essentially the reasons for completing it is tied to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans contractual agreement that we signed last year as a expiry date of January 1st, 2013.
Is that for the whole project, or is that for, like, can we get it started?
It's generally would be for the whole project. What I've heard, for projects that are underway, there could be a potential for getting the timeline extended, but for a project that has not begun and goes beyond the timeline, essentially you're looking at a reapplication. But it's really hard to tell until you actually do negotiate and discuss with the DFO staff.
And the contract?
Yeah. with the
Sure,
contract.
the DFO was involved in the whole thing, it's only the below is from the high tide, well, it is from the high tide, but basically the underwater works that are going to be done.
Essentially, yes.
And you have got a recommendation that where that could be done without doing upper work?
It would definitely cut down on the cost of the upland work. There's definitely a transitional area in the lower part of between where the parking is now and where the ramp and the high tide mark. There's a transitional area that would likely have to be reconstructed, primarily to deal with the access and managing the stormwater. But certainly we could look at options of holding back on the parking upgrades and evaluating the needs for the future, and also Tunstall Bay Club Association has expressed an interest in working with the municipality to maybe utilize some of their existing parking spaces or other spaces, open spaces that are underutilized.
Is it not part of the friction right now, the upland part, that's sort of causing some delays?
I wouldn't say that anything that the upland part is causing delays, but certainly there are a lot of things to consider, a lot of different user groups in the area, and certainly a lot of negotiation and discussion work has to be done to try to satisfy all the different users of each area.
What about the cost? What about the cost? I mean, the $220,000, didn't we discuss that? That was pretty steep. Did we have we had?
That's based on costs from an engineer. It's a fairly rough cost estimate, but they've done their homework on concrete prices and days to do work and that sort of level of detail. So they've certainly looked into it. I mean, you can see from the breakdown, there's on page 6 or page 162, I guess, I think that's of the entire package, but it's page 6 of this small report. You can see the breakdown. There's a fairly good portion is for the design and the compensation work, and the construction. Part of it is also monitoring and that sort of thing. That's when you work in the foreshore area, you just have to pay these costs to consultants to satisfy the sensitive nature of the area you're working in.
It's a more expensive type of concrete than we were originally envisioning. I mean, when we started on this project, which was probably 2001, it was gonna cost about $50,000.
Yeah.
It was just a simple concrete block, and a concrete ramp on top of that.
Yeah, it's hard to really exactly know what basis was behind the original design, but you're right, it was about $58,000, I believe, for the original estimate, which my understanding was some sort of precast or locks that
concrete
were
locks with
placed on their
pillars.
side and tension with an anchor or something like this, but, my understanding at the time, I mean, I wasn't here, so I'll have to, make some assumptions on what may have been done at the time for that cost estimate was perhaps, that was including, materials and maybe wasn't including the monitoring or, compensation or any other things. Part of the issue is that as we've been working through the different jurisdictions to get approval, there's really no understanding of what sort of compensation could be required and what sort of monitoring and other mitigative things that have costs associated with them. So as we moved along the lines and gotten some more confirmation from the Department of Fisheries on what they're requiring and went down the route to get cost estimates from professional engineers, I think the true costs are becoming apparent.
So just to add to that, I mean, looking at this list of costs, the actual construction of the ramp is not quite $100,000.
No, it's
A
$108,000.
little over 100,000, 108. And the consulting fees largely have all had to do with getting Fisheries and Oceans approval and the myriad of plans we've had to present to them. And the 85,000 for the parking lot and the 26 for the fish habitat and the monitoring, those are all costs we weren't contemplating when we started into this, so. And knowing how difficult it was to get that approval, if we don't start now, then, I mean, I think we've got a concern that we might have to start all over again.
Yeah,
And we'd be throwing away the 38,000 that we had to spend to satisfy DFL.
that's your guess is really as good as mine, but it's a good likelihood. And certainly, there's been quite a bit of money spent on consulting to get us through the approval. And when we go back to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, you can never be certain on what other requirements they might have or changes in the concept that they may be seeking.
And we don't have to do any of the 85,000 at this point.
If we were to not do parking improvements, we would probably have to do maybe 10,000, somewhere around there for the transitional works that I mentioned. Maybe 15 if once you're including all the storm works and the resurfacing and that sort of thing too.
And the water lot lease issues are solved, so we can actually do we got 2 windows, right, with the spring and August to do this work, or?
There are a few windows where tides are working favorably for us. Yeah, generally, end of May, June seems kind of the most optimal time
You
with
want
the
low
tides.
tides and daylight.
That's right.
But if you were to proceed with just the underwater work and so forth, then you basically just have to look for your tide window to do it. There's nothing else.
There's a fisheries window.
No, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
But in other words, there's still an uncertainty here in terms of the upland side of even if you were to proceed right now, there isn't clear approval, and there are people that are against this.
Well, we do have approval. The fisheries gave us a contract that allows us to work again.
I'm not talking about the fisheries aspect. I'm
You're talking about the
upland.
20,000 reclamation part.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure what's that 20,000 new
Well,
fish
that's-
habitat.
But isn't the
So-
question here, shall we spend $200,000 on the boat ramp? Because that's what we did last time.
Yeah.
We are not talking right now about how much to spend this and when the next one.
Or
Is the time now to spend 200, we spent already $38,000, but do we spend another $180,000 on the boat ramp?
Well, it's not 180, it's only 108 to build the ramp and the 26 being the remediation.
But if the total is 220 minus 38, that's 180.
But we don't have to
No,
do
but
the
we don't have to pay.
85,000 for the
Sorry?
parking, the 85,000 for the parking.
We don't have to.
We
do
don't
that.
have to
There's
do
a
that.
there's a parking lot and paving and all that sort of stuff, which doesn't necessarily have to be done to give us a boat ramp on the west side.
So then why did
For the
we
time
include it
being.
actually in the budget if it's not needed?
Because ultimately you need to do it to make a professional, proper boat launch ramp and parking and all that sort of stuff.
To not do, certainly the turnaround, and put the boat ramp in is inviting some real conflicts in the area. I would say, from my opinion, The parking spaces is something that's, I think, could be, maybe worked, some short-term, agreements with the Tunstall Bay Club Association, evaluation period, that sort of thing, but,
Yep.